But all countries, including Singapore, face this problem. And it's interesting that no Muslim country today has condemned China on the Xinjiang policy. But when I was cruising in Croatia, someone told me what an Italian professor in Chengdu said. It's quite interesting. Take it in the right spirit, you know. He said the Americans are not known to love Chinese. They're not known to love Muslims, but somehow they love Chinese Muslims a lot. In 1982, Margaret Thatcher visited Deng Xiaoping and mooted the idea of another 50 years of British rule. She was badly advised. Deng Xiaoping, with great accuracy, spat into a spittoon, you know. And Margaret Thatcher was so rattled when she left the Great Hall of the People, she tripped on the steps. And they knew that that's not negotiable. So in 1984, they had the Joint Declaration. Now, the Joint Declaration is asserted by the British as a treaty which bound China post-1997. China never accepted that. The Joint Declaration is called a Joint Declaration because you make your declaration, I make my declaration. We put it out together in order to facilitate a smooth handover on June 30th, 1997. It was not the treaty. If it was the treaty like the Treaty of Nanjing, it would have been called a treaty. So I have a very interpretation of Hong Kong, and it's based upon my own experience living there and the sort of things which were happening. That when they stormed the legislature, I think it was Nancy Pelosi who said, "Oh, what a glorious sight," until January 6th happened. Then it didn't look so glorious after that. So the double standards were so thick you could cut through it with a knife. Yeah. Germany was divided because it was an aggressor. China was divided because it was a victim. So the moral cost of German reunification is on any balance greater than German reunification. I thought that was a very powerful message that Wang Yi put across, but it was hardly reported in your media. They don't support invasion. They've said that in the first principle. But at the same time, they say there's a history to it, which was NATO's relentless expansion to the east, which the Chinese have always opposed because it bifurcates the world and it is divisive and aggressive. So China is saying, look, if you want peace, you can't just look at a snapshot. You've got to look at the entire video. Then when you look at the entire video, you'll find a way to the future. But if you just look at a snapshot, you won't find a way to the future.
刚才大家听到的是新加坡前外交部长杨荣文先生2023年在意大利佛罗伦萨的一段问答交流。接下来我们将为大家呈现那场精彩交锋的更多内容。说起杨荣文先生，很多朋友可能都知道，他在亚洲乃至世界舞台上都是一个非常有分量的声音。他的经历非常传奇，从新加坡五中部队的准将，到在内阁任职23年，先后担任新闻、卫生、贸易工业以及最重要的外交部长。后来他又主动选择离开政坛，转身成为香港大学和新加坡国立大学的顶尖学者。所以他这种既进过权力核心，又做过顶级学问的局内人经验，让他对这个复杂世界的洞察往往与西方主流的叙事截然不同。在这场交流中，他面对的是一群来自欧洲顶尖学术机构的学者和研究员，对话也因此触及了当今世界一些最敏感的话题。接下来我们就进入这场精彩的问答。
Well, thank you so much, Professor Yeo, for your insightful speech. My name is Mahmoud Jawadi. I'm the second-year master's student here at the School of Transnational Governance. Well, my question is a bit about the state of play and the status quo and the future of the EU-China relations. In 2019, the European Union characterized China as competitor, rival, and also partner. And since then until now, different European officials just describe China as an assertive power, or sometimes describe it as a country tries to rewrite the international order. But 2 weeks ago, again, Mr. Borrell submitted a paper at Gimnich meeting stating China as partner, rival, and competitor. So there is no change in characterization of China. So my question is that how accurate that characterization and that vision, and if you think that it is not really accurate, what would be your prescription in order just to characterize China for Europe? Thank you.
For a number of centuries, the West has been used to being dominant in the world. I talk about Jesus Christ from being Chinese to being European. An equivalent process must now take place to bring us to a better balance point. It will take time. That the Americans, from helping China rise again, now fear China's rise, is to be expected. That there should be a Western response should also be expected. China will not escalate because it knows it's getting stronger and philosophically has a deep sense of itself. But at the same time, they cannot afford to show weakness. And just by being firm and being independent, the Chinese are giving hope to others. They too can stand firm and be independent, even though they are weaker. And this will help crystallize a multipolar world. But this is not a process which the Americans can take lightly, and not even a process which the entire West will take lightly. So we're in the period of a great transition, but it will come about. And to some extent, the global economic situation and the Ukraine war will help precipitate gradually this future. Oh, you're from Iran? Oh, okay. Then I will elaborate later.
Yes, my name is Tamás Szűcs. I'm from Hungary. Currently here for a 1-year visiting fellowship. But I work for the European Commission otherwise. And thank you for the amazing lecture, very insightful. And my question is basically also specifically because you have been Minister for Culture and also Minister for Foreign Affairs, among many other titles. How do you see the role of culture in foreign policy in general, and the role and use of soft power in China in particular? Because there are quite controversial views, especially since Xi Jinping took power. So basically that's the question. Thank you.
In my years in government, I found that culture touches the opposite party the most, and is the most remembered. I knew Frank Walter Steinmeier when he was foreign minister. And what we most remember is a little project when I had a piece of the Berlin Wall in my constituency. And I asked Helmut Kohl, whom I was a minister in attendance to in 1994, and at that time was already a recluse. I asked for a message from him through Horst Stelschik, and he gave me that message. I don't think Steinmeier remembers me for anything else. In my relationship with India, I was for 10 years involved in the revival of an ancient Buddhist university called Nalanda, which was recorded in great detail by a Chinese monk in the 7th century, but which history was long forgotten. It was the world's first university. It was destroyed by Afghan invaders after Oxford was established, but before Cambridge. And in India, they did not know the history. But in China, that history is immortalized in the journey to the West and the story of the monkey god. Never lost. In the 19th century, the British archaeologist Alexander Cunningham, who started the Archaeological Survey of India, a great institution, he read the translation of what the monk wrote in the 7th century, and he was astonished by its accuracy. And after that grew in India a group of Buddha Sahibs, they call them, who were archaeologists working off Chinese records of India. So the Indians remember me and gave me a very high award for this university project. And with the Russians, I helped I'm still helping them establish their church in Singapore. And the Russian Foreign Ministry remembers me not for my work in the Trade Ministry or Foreign Ministry, but for my work in helping them establish a church in Singapore. So culture touches people the most deeply. They'll forget everything else, but they never forget how you treated them in their identity.
Morten Bergsma, I'm the director of CILRUP, the Center for International Law Research and Policy. We have an office here in Florence. Thank you for your brilliant presentation. In the question of Xinjiang and the Uyghurs, the US State Department and various British actors are saying that there has been genocide, whilst the leading scholars of the law of genocide, they say that there is no evidence, there is no proof, and that the US State Department should stop using this classification unless it produces the proof. By making use of such classifications as genocide and crimes against humanity, one also generates feelings of blameworthiness and that there is a threat from the Chinese government. What are your thoughts on the way the US and British actors use human rights terminology, the human rights narrative, and soft international law in the contest which you refer to between the United States and China?
Well, it's part of the information warfare that makes it very difficult for us sometimes to know what to believe and what not to believe. I first accompanied Lee Kuan Yew to Xinjiang in the year 2000, just before he stepped down as Prime Minister. It's okay. That's not Xinjiang. Yeah. I was surprised when I went there to find that road signs were in Roman characters, in Chinese characters, and in Arabic characters. So I asked accompanying Chinese officials, I said, when did that happen? Oh, he said Mao Zedong wanted it. In fact, when the communists took over, they restored the names of many places to their Uyghur names. But of course, the Chinese attitude is, you're a minority, you threaten me politically, I smash you. Like they did with Yaqub Bey in the 19th century, the Qing dynasty. But if you don't threaten me, then I'm very generous to you. In fact, I treat you better than Han people. So the population policy never applied to the Uyghurs. And that's why there are many more Uyghurs today in proportionate terms than Han Chinese and any other group. So there's certainly no physical genocide. In 2001 August, I went back to Xinjiang, the trade delegation, and I went to Kashgar. In Kashgar, I saw women in Central Asian burqas, which is a whole basket put on top of their head. I was shocked. I asked Chinese officials, I said, why do you allow this? They said, no, it's a custom. When I was in Urumqi, they took me horse riding. I can't ride a horse to save myself. So they said, no, don't worry. A young girl or boy will hop behind you, a Kazakh, and they'll gallop the horse. And it was very exciting. I tried to speak to her in my poor Mandarin. She could not understand me. So again, I asked the Chinese, I said, why aren't you teaching them Chinese? They said, no, they're nomads, no, we leave them alone. They did not realize then, it was 2 weeks before September 11, that the Salafis had been working on their minds. And from 2010 to 2015, there were a spate of terrorist incidents in China to a point where the Han people in Xinjiang had to arm themselves. I also knew this from my cousins in China who used to go to Xinjiang, and then during that period, they say it's no longer safe, and now they're all over Xinjiang again because peace has returned. So this whole story that there's genocide in Xinjiang, to me, does not reflect what's happening there. Yes, they have been draconian in making sure that Salafi influence is controlled in China. But all countries, including Singapore, face this problem. And it's interesting that no Muslim country today has condemned China on the Xinjiang policy. But when I was cruising in Croatia, someone told me what an Italian professor in Chengdu said. It's quite interesting. Take it in the right spirit, you know. He said the Americans are not known to love Chinese. They're not known to love Muslims, but somehow they love Chinese Muslims a lot. So that's my answer to your question. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Sonja Punkscher-Rickmann, a member of the External Advisory Board and of the Austrian Academy of Sciences. Thank you very much for an utterly inspiring speech. I have tried to keep track of Chinese development, reading a lot, but yeah, I will certainly not have reached the point of Matteo Ricci. I have a question which is a politico-philosophical question. How would you estimate the Chinese capacity to deal with discontinuities and to integrate that into the Taiwanese question? Perhaps you will now tell me that I don't understand anything of Taiwan, and I would take that. But it is a democratic state. Is that not the case, in your opinion? And if so, how would, in a Chinese reading, to be dealt with this democratic development as a different one as China has experienced, in order to perhaps assess the whole question of independence in a different way? Is that at all feasible, thinkable, etc.? We had a similar development with Hong Kong, hadn't we? Where there was this solution of one country, two systems. And, well, I don't think that China really lived up to that. But yeah, perhaps you see this differently. Thank you.
China never accepted the Treaty of Nanjing, which ceded Hong Kong in perpetuity to the British as being a valid treaty. They never accepted that. The issue was not put to the test because a large part of Hong Kong on the mainland side was leased to Britain for 99 years. And even by British law, that land had to be returned. And when that land is returned, Hong Kong is no longer viable. In 1982, Margaret Thatcher visited Deng Xiaoping and mooted the idea of another 50 years of British rule. She was badly advised. Deng Xiaoping, with great accuracy, spat into a spittoon, you know. And Margaret Thatcher was so rattled when she left the Great Hall of the People, she tripped on the steps. And they knew that that's not negotiable. So in 1984, they had the Joint Declaration. Now, the Joint Declaration is asserted by the British as a treaty which bound China post-1997. China never accepted that. The Joint Declaration is called a Joint Declaration because you make your declaration, I make my declaration, we put it out together in order to facilitate a smooth handover on June 30th, 1997. It was not a treaty. If it was the treaty like the Treaty of Nanjing, it would have been called a treaty. So the Chinese are saying, once we have a smooth handover, sovereignty has returned to China. But China in this declaration said that it will promulgate a basic law, which it legislated in consultation with Hong Kong people, under which one country, two systems would last for 50 years. In that basic law, a national security law in Hong Kong must be enacted. So for 20 over years, it was never enacted, which means that in terms of performance, Hong Kong failed to keep up its side of the bargain. So the mainland then imposed national security law on Hong Kong, but still requires Hong Kong to make subsidiary legislation. And that's right now being done. I lived in Hong Kong during that period, and my wife and I no longer felt safe. I saw the way the social media was systematically demonizing the police, and the Hong Kong police is nothing like police in Paris or Los Angeles or New York. And they were extremely well behaved, but they were made to look as if they all had horns and tails, which was utterly not the case. But there was a game being played. Cui bono, who benefited from the Hong Kong unrest? It led to the re-election of Tsai Ing-wen, because all the pundits said that she would lose to Han Kuo-yu. Yeah. But because of what happened in Hong Kong, the whole table turned. So I have a very interpretation of Hong Kong, and it's based upon my own experience living there and the sort of things which were happening. That when they stormed the legislature, I think it was Nancy Pelosi who said, "Oh, what a glorious sight," until January 6th happened. Then it didn't look so glorious after that. So the double standards were so thick you could cut through it with a knife. Yeah. So on Taiwan, China has told Taiwan, you can keep the army. So long as you accept the idea of one China, you can interpret it the way you want. It means that you're not independent. And one day when we unite, maybe I'll drop PRC, you drop ROC, and we can call it China. Yeah. So it is an internal affair. It is one of reconciliation. You know, when Annalena Baerbock, the German foreign minister, visited China recently, State Councillor Wang Yi, who was a former foreign minister, he said something which to me was very moving. He said, "We supported German reunification. We hope Germany will support our reunification. Germany was divided because it was an aggressor. China was divided because it was a victim. So the moral cause of German reunification is on any balance greater than German reunification." I thought that was a very powerful message that Wang Yi put across, but it was hardly reported in your media.
Oh, it's me, is it? Or not? No, I think it's behind.
Okay, thank you very much for your speech. My name is Farhan. I'm from Indonesia, your neighbor. So I'm interested in your speech that you said that we are moving towards the multipolar world, and we hope it's going to be a very peacefully process. And I'm interested in what's your view about Southeast Asia? Because in my mind, I have like two scenarios for Southeast Asia. Like the first scenario is like Southeast Asia will be like the Latin America for the US when they rise, which means they are going to be the hinterland for China, the backyard for China. Or in more optimistic scenario, I think that Southeast Asia will be the hub for the world, because now Europe, US, they're going to East Asia, then they are finding place to find the common places, Southeast Asia. And what's your view? What do you have any other think about Southeast Asia in the future when we are seeing the multipolar world? Thank you very much.
Well, ASEAN is very important, and ASEAN can be a weak pole in a multipolar world, not a strong pole, because ASEAN hasn't got ICBMs and nuclear submarines to threaten other people. But Southeast Asia is diverse. Historically and geographically, it's between the great civilizations of East Asia and South Asia. We have this wonderful saying in Sabah, tanah di bawah angin, the land below the winds, the trade winds. That's Southeast Asia. And it welcomes people from all over the world. No one feels unwelcome in Indonesia or in Phuket or in Singapore. You can be from Mars, you'll still be welcome in Southeast Asia. This is our culture. But our integration into a larger Chinese-dominated economy is inevitable. And historically, every time China was united, there was a great China trade, which gave prosperity to the kingdoms of Southeast Asia. And we are seeing a replay of the historical cycle. China's trade with ASEAN overtook China's trade with Europe and America some years ago. China's trade with ASEAN is greater than US trade with Europe, and will reach $1 trillion this year. And, the China is a cold country. They all want to have homes in Indonesia. Yeah. Because the climate is balmy, the food is good, the people are friendly. So I see a relationship between China and Southeast Asia which will endure. But they know that in Southeast Asia we are promiscuous. We don't want monogamous relationships. Now, Zhu Rongji, in the year 2000, I was there. At an ASEAN-China summit, he proposed a free trade agreement with ASEAN. At that time, ASEAN countries were still reeling from the Asian financial crisis and did not know how to respond. But in the end, we agreed. And when the framework agreement was signed in Phnom Penh in 2002, Zhu Rongji said, China does not seek for itself an exclusive position in Southeast Asia. China has never changed that position. In other words, by all means, be friendly to Americans, Japanese, Europeans, but please take into account my own interests. If you hurt me, I'll hurt you. But I will not make my enemy your enemy, which is increasingly what Americans are telling us, that America's enemies are our enemies. And the use of long-arm jurisdiction, which is causing a lot of angst all over the world and leading to de-dollarization. But it will take time. But there is a big difference between the way China handles Southeast Asia with the way the US handles Southeast Asia. In the case of Europe, because you no longer have a strategic impact on Southeast Asia, you're welcome in every country. So Europe is a free rider in Southeast Asia.
In terms of business management, my question to you is, what can the European Union do to improve a real understanding of Confucian culture in terms of business management, and also looking at the future of business management? How can we understand better and implement better the Chinese contribution to business management in terms of yin and yang? These are enormous contributions which I think China can make to the future of business management. How can the European Union help in promoting a better understanding of culture in this sense?
Well, I think European cultural and educational institutions can play a big role. I've been an advisor to IESE Business School in Barcelona for over 10 years. And I just came over from Barcelona after delivering the commencement speech to the 2023 MBA class. IESE has one-third American, one-third European, one-third Asian in the student population. And just in their daily interactions, people by osmosis learn from one another what it means to live on a daily basis with diversity. And it stimulates mutual respect. And a school like STG should do that. I think more and more European institutions should somehow incorporate the diversity of the world into Europe. Now, Europe's management of its own internal diversity is fascinating and provides inspiration to the rest of the world. But that internal integration cannot be done without connection to the world outside. And the world outside is diverse. And when we see how diverse the world is, it makes it easier for us to manage our own internal diversity. I did a short posting of my meeting with Alex yesterday in Facebook. And someone asked, what is transnational governance? I said, well, it's mostly about Europe's internal governance. But I added, Europe's internal governance, if it succeeds, is good for the world. If within Europe you fail, then we will fail in the world. So from that perspective, I wrote, we have an equity interest in the success of the European experiment. But you should not conduct this experiment without reference to the world outside.
Okay, I think we have time for a couple more questions only, and there's approximately 1 million hands. Michele, I saw you first.
Hello, thank you. I'm Michele Giovanardi from Italy, and I'm here project associate at the School of Transnational Governance. So my question is, again, you touched upon Taiwan and how this is not an expression of an imperialist kind of way of seeing the world, but a way of seeing a just order in the world. But of course, in international politics, different states can have different kind of idea about a just world order. And what can be seen as something just can also be seen as something imperialist or expansionist. So I think the key here is to really succeed in what you say, to build trust between the parties, to convince them what you're saying is in fact something not another step in power politics, but something about the just world order. So about trust, what are the concrete steps that we can envision to build trust between Europe and China?
It begins by being interested in the other, which means respecting the other. And once you do that, you begin to see the good on the other side. And then it's more difficult for you to be angry with the other party. People get enraged when they don't understand the other side. Then you can kill. But when you realize that the other side has the same hopes and fears as you have, with family and children to worry about, then it will cause you to pause. And perchance to say, oh, maybe we can explain why they are behaving that way. Well, China has taken a dangerous but very interesting step to make proposals for peace in Ukraine. The peace proposal is just a statement of principles. So it's not likely to get anywhere for the time being. But at some point in time, the various parties will be exhausted. Right now, they're still giving war a chance. At some point in time, they have to give peace a chance. And there will have to be a ceasefire. I don't think there'll be a peace agreement for a long time. There'll be some kind of a partition, which is the reason why Henry Kissinger hinted at it when he said that Ukraine should join NATO, not only to protect Ukraine, but to protect NATO from Ukraine, which means almost a colonization of Ukraine to maintain the peace. Now, the Chinese envoy said, because mathematically there's no solution, he said, we can't talk peace unless the parties in their hearts open up a little space for the other. In other words, it's not just the work of diplomats. It is in the propaganda when we get people to hate the other. Are you prepared to loosen up and say, look, see possible good in the other? Then the process of negotiation can begin. But it will not begin until both sides are exhausted by war.
Right to the back. Gentleman in the stripy shirt.
Thank you. My name is Umberto. I'm a visiting fellow here. I just wanted to ask you, we speculated a lot about what the world with a more dominant role for China would be in the future. And you mentioned briefly the war in Ukraine. I was about to ask you, what is your take about China non-opposition to the invasion of a sovereign country? So, if you think about the perspective a European has, we have seen similar situation like the Russian invasion of China in the 30s, in the 40s. This resonates very deeply with us, what has happened between Ukraine and Russia. So I was wondering, what is the way in which China is seeing this conflict in a way that does not bring it to openly condemn the invasion of a sovereign country as neighbor?
From a geopolitical viewpoint, China wants Russia to be a separate pole to stand up to the US. So if there's regime change in Russia, and Russia becomes a part of a Western alliance, then China will come under much greater pressure. So from that higher perspective, China would not want Russia to fail. So economically, China will support Russia. But militarily, Ukraine is a distant war for them, over which they don't think they have complete understanding. and about which they don't think they should get too involved, except as a peacemaker if there's room for a peacemaker. That's what they do. They don't support invasion. They've said that in the first principle. But at the same time, they say there's a history to it, which was NATO's relentless expansion to the east, which the Chinese have always opposed because it bifurcates the world and it is divisive and aggressive. So China is saying, look, if you want peace, you can't just look at a snapshot. You've got to look at the entire video. Then when you look at the entire video, you'll find a way to the future. But if you just look at a snapshot, you won't find a way to the future.
I am informed by the powers that be that we can keep going. So, since we're having such an interesting discussion, maybe I'm looking at the powers. Two more questions? Yeah, okay. Okay, this gentleman.
Hi. My name is Gao Hen Zhang, and I'm a Jean Monnet residential fellow this year at the UI, but normally I am an associate professor of Italian studies at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And I was born and raised in Hangzhou in the PRC, but I've been living in the States and Canada for a while. So my question touches upon China and Europe's engagement in Africa and how that engagement can potentially shape the future between these two geopolitical entities. I think in the discussion so far we have touched upon their relationship in the Pacific Rim and Eurasia just right now. So I'd like to consult your take on their engagement in Africa. And we know the context is that Europe taken as a whole is the top investor in Africa, and China is making strides. And the media, the Western media at least, has been covering a lot on their conflicts, but sometimes collaborations as well. So that's my question. Thank you.
In my script, I covered Africa and the Middle East, but I didn't have time just now. To me, Europe and China share common interests in the Middle East, which is to help the Africans develop. Because of the color revolutions, migration from Europe has been growing. It's becoming a big problem for Europe, for Italy, for France, for many countries. So there is every interest for Europe to help Africa develop, to stabilize Africa. But Africa will not be stabilized in your own image. Africa will be stabilized, can only be stabilized if you take into account its tribal character. If you ignore the tribal character of Africa, democracy will fail. Just as if you ignore the tribal history of Europe, you will fail in Europe. So China today is building much of Africa's infrastructure. And they're doing it in their own self-interest to extract minerals, trade, but also to win goodwill, because it's 54 votes in the UN, and these votes are important to China. So I'm an advisor to a Chinese company that's become Singaporean, investing in a very big iron ore mine in a West African country, for which they have to build a 600-kilometer railroad. And once that railroad is built, the whole country will be transformed, because then the inland spaces can gain access to the sea, which is the internet, right? Then you can trade, then the value of your labor will be much greater. So by right, Europe and China should work together to help Africa develop. So I was very troubled to read President Ursula von der Leyen recently saying that Europe helping Africa should be in competition with China. She suggested that. Why? And Africa has not a good historical memory of Europe, which has enslaved it, colonized it, and now you're telling me who my friend should be. So they resent it powerfully. So if you interview any African leader, they will tell you, rubbish. We will deal with China on our own terms because China is helping us. And there's none of the historical baggage. So Europe should be working with China in Africa and in the entire Middle East. Now the Americans have a different agenda. For them, it's just big power contest. And here, in Middle East and on Africa, I think the American and European agendas diverge. And Europe should seek greater autonomy and be more circumspect in its own self-interest in working with China.
Last question.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful presentation. And I'm Kun Hao Yang. I come from China. I'm now a PhD researcher at the Department of Law at UI. So my question is about the... Sorry?
At UI.
At UI, yeah, I'm sorry. So my question is about, from the Chinese perspective, about the Europe's in China's future. So as the EU is adjusting the Chinese strategy and proposing the de-risking strategy rather than the decoupling that the US one, and the EU is trying to make this risking to the G7 level, to more like a circle surrounding China. So what do you think from the Chinese perspective? It is a kind of opportunity or challenge, and what kind of reactions may occur from the Chinese side to this risking strategy? Thanks.
Many years ago, I was a visiting scholar in Peking University, and when I was there, I was invited by the China's National Defense University, Guofangda, to give a speech about US-China relations from a Singapore perspective. One question was about the deployment of 2,000 Marines, US Marines in Darwin. So I told the Chinese, you must expect that at the bedrock, the relationship between Australia and the US is a profound one. You need only visit the War Museum in Canberra to know that it is a relationship watered in blood. In the same way, I think China should know that the relationship between Europe and America is a profound one, particularly white America. But America's demographics are changing. And more Americans do not resonate as much when they see the Parthenon or when they visit Florence, because they have a different history. So American politics will change. But this common basis, that what created America was as a daughter civilization of Europe, that is very deep. So China should have no unrealistic expectation that it can ever divide America from Europe. But it can tell Europe, look, we have different interests, let's work on all your interests, those which are allied to America and those which are more important for yourself. Take a practical approach and be patient. So I see China as wanting a strong EU. They will support EU autonomy, even in defense, but they know that will take a very long time. And they support a strong euro because they resent the exorbitant privilege which the US dollar enjoys today, which enables the US to have 800 military bases around the world.
杨荣文教授这场信息量巨大的问答就到这里，我们来简单回顾一下他提出的几个核心观点。首先是关于文明的视角，他反复强调，要理解中国，就必须跳出西方的框架，从中国数千年未曾中断的文明历史、文字体系和文化基因中去寻找答案。其次是关于地缘政治的现实，他非常直白地指出，中国需要俄罗斯来平衡美国，因此不会希望俄罗斯失败。他还强调，台湾问题对中国而言是一个没有商量余地的历史正义问题。再次是关于香港和新疆的叙事，在这两个争议极大的话题上，他提供了一个与西方主流媒体完全相反的版本，并指责西方存在系统性的双重标准和信息战。最后是关于文化的力量，与冷冰冰的地缘政治相反，他通过个人经历强调，文化才是外交中触动人心最深的部分，它能超越单纯的利益算计。我觉得杨荣文先生之所以能赢得那么多人的尊重，不仅仅是因为他敢于讲出这些不被西方待见的真话，更重要的是他的这套思考方式为我们提供了一种久违的源自我们自身文明的自信。它让我们看到我们完全可以不依赖西方的理论和话语体系，而是从自己的历史、文化和哲学中找到理解这个世界并与这个世界相处的智慧。当他用《西游记》的故事来连接中印历史，用邓小平吐痰的细节来解读中英交锋时，我们感受到的不仅仅是知识，更是一种深深的文化认同感。我想这可能就是东升西降这个词除了经济和军事之外更深层次的文化含义。今天的分享就到这里，感谢大家收看， 我们下次见。